The 40 years. All right,
Sorry.
got it. Okay. The 40 years went very quickly. It seemed like just yesterday I was a young engineer. I started out as a test engineer for Underwriters Laboratories. I enjoyed being a test engineer. Got to travel around the world and test to all sorts of specifications. And then in about 1988, somebody handed me a copy of then ISO 9000, and they said, one day every company will need this. I don't know how my old boss knew that, but sure enough, that's true. And I got involved in quality by accident, as many of us do, and have been talking about it for about 30 years now. Worked with registrars. I worked with a consulting firm for many years, and really now I work with companies to help them implement quality systems and add value to their current quality systems. I also do some registration audits for a couple of major registrars, which I enjoy because it gets me into virtually every industry. And that's really the premise of my chat tonight, which is ISO 9000, AS9100, ISO 1345, GNP, IATF for the automotive industry. Virtually every industry has quality management standards as a requirement. And of course, after 30 some odd years, um, we still have some challenges. I was a little bit dismayed recently in the aerospace industry when I heard of all the issues that Boeing seems to be having. So I want to kind of get that the elephant off the table, right? Um, Boeing was one of the best quality systems I ever saw 20, 25 years ago. And there used to be an expression, if it's not Boeing, it's not going. And they were the mainstay. And when I saw that bolts were missing from planes and doors are coming off and all the issues that they've had and the scrutiny, for the first time in my life, I had a flight a few weeks back. I wound up checking what aircraft it was, which I've never done before. I always just assumed aircraft was the safest way to travel, and I saw it was an Airbus. And quietly to myself, I said, "Thank goodness." And I never thought in my life, 40 years of compliance, that I would ever say that. So, quality is as important a topic now as it's ever been. In fact, I would say that it's the primary, should be one of the primary drivers in most organizations. My old boss used to have an expression. He was a very smart guy. He used to say, whenever you ignore quality, it always comes back to bite you in the butt. And he didn't use the word but. And quality, which I've now spent a lot of years talking about in every industry. I've been fortunate to work in the automotive industry. I spent 5 years there. To work in aerospace, I spent many years working in the aerospace industry, now medical device and pharmaceutical and military. So, a military contractor today. It cuts across every industry, every size of a company, big companies, small companies. It's one of those things that is pervasive through every organization. And so tonight's topic's not just about aerospace, but it's about quality systems. And for many years, I was the executive director of the Danbury ASQ, which I really enjoyed. Nobody else wanted the job at that time, so I said I'll do it, and I really enjoyed it. And one of the members, and this is going back some 20 some odd years, was Dr. Joseph Duran, who's considered, one of the leaders in quality thought. He wrote the one of the most important quality books I've ever read, called the Quality Control Handbook. And those of you who are old enough know that there's a lot of good stuff in there. And Dr. Duran, back in the 60s, when he wrote that book, went to Japan, and him
Mhm.
and Dr. Deming were two of the primary people, reasons why we're driving around in Toyotas and Hondas and Subarus. They helped to drive quality in Japan. So
Not,
I,
not,
I
not before. I'm sorry for interrupting, but
go
not
ahead.
before he tried to get the big three in the
Yeah,
U.S.
that's
to
exactly
adopt
right.
it, and they refused. So he said, "Okay, I'll find
Yeah,
somebody else." And so he went to
yeah,
Japan.
that's exactly right. They threw him out of the big three. But
Yeah.
anyway, so the point is that Dr. Duran's Quality Control Handbook, which I read periodically, he was an honorary member of the Danbury ASQ. And I used to go around telling people, oh, yeah, Dr. Duran's one of my members. And it was really good for recruitment. Of course, he never showed up at the meetings. But one year I invited him to come out and speak, which he did graciously. And I got him to sign my quality control handbook. And what Dr. Duran and many others have said is that you don't have quality or business systems, they're integrated, right? So you show me a company that doesn't focus on the P&L statement, doesn't focus on quality, I'll show you a company that's in real trouble. And you can't focus on one and not the other. They're married to one another. So when I spend a lot of time working in companies, I think a lot about why don't we seem to get the attention of management, of senior management. I think a lot about this. It actually keeps me up at night, believe it or not. And a lot of it has to do with the language that we speak. Management, senior management, tends to talk in terms of money. They to talk in terms of P&L statements. And in fact, that's the way many of them are trained. They go to the best business schools, and they very rarely talk to them about process, and they very rarely talk to them about quality systems, I found. So we're actually talking a different language, and it's very difficult to get their attention. So one of the things I've tried to do recently is speak a language that they understand. And that means that you don't just talk about money all the time, but you try to relate to what we do in quality systems, in supply systems, in customer service, and translate for them in terms of money. So the questions I ask to them is in your current quality management system, in your current internal audits, in your current management reviews, do they actually add real value or do they get ignored? Or are they just checking the box? And do we put a dollar value on the savings that we have in organizations? And I get a lot of blank stares. And oftentimes they don't understand what that means, or they don't appreciate that quality management systems are a way to add value to a business and to have a cost savings. So the question I would ask you tonight, just kind of generally, is within your own organizations, how often do you look at your quality management systems, not in terms of cost, but in terms of a savings, in terms of how much money it actually contributes? So if you had to write down a figure of how much your quality management systems save you each year, how much they contribute to the bottom line, write down a number. I'd be curious to maybe at the end we'll hear some of those numbers. But I get numbers like thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. And one of the things that I try to help companies understand is that a well-run quality management system, good internal audits, good supplier management programs can save the company literally hundreds of thousands, in some instances, millions of dollars. When I spent all those years working in the automotive industry, it would not be uncommon for a company to save tens, hundreds of millions of dollars in cost avoidance and cost savings. We used to have a term that we talked about, the cost of poor quality. I'm not even sure they talk about that much these days. But what does it cost you to do things wrong? And I imagine that today, Boeing is probably asking that question. What does it cost us over the last year? And what's it going to cost us for doing for doing the things wrong that we've done? And of course, it's easy to point fingers. It's easy to try to minimize that, but it translates into real dollars. So one of the things I tried to do with companies recently is get them to appreciate that quality is not a cost. Quality is a savings. every dollar we save, and there are many quality books written about it, drops right to the bottom line. In fact, Phil Crosby, which many of you probably remember, wrote a book about 35 years ago called Quality is Free. And in there, he estimated that most companies waste 10 to 20% of their sales volume doing things wrong and over again. And that's a huge number. And what he used to try to do was to cut that number in half. And he said that if we cut that number in half, that money drops right to the bottom line. So, what we try to do in organizations is help them waste less. And I believe quality management systems, whether they're ISO 9000 or whether they're AS9100 or ISO 1345, is about adding real value to our audit systems, to our management systems. You know, some of the quality management systems that I see when I go into companies, and I might be in 40 or 50 companies a year, they sound a little bit like this. See if this sounds familiar. The auditor walks in and says, do you have a procedure? And the auditee says, oh, yes, of course we have a procedure. And he says, do you follow the procedure? Well, of course, yes. We thank you for passing our audit. We'll see you next year. That's what they sound like. And of course, if you're doing audits that way, if you're just going in and checking the boxes, you're not adding much value because most of us can write procedures and most of us follow them somewhat. And the real question is, how do we take our current quality systems and really drive some improvement through those organizations? And this is particularly poignant now with all the problems that seem to be popping up in the aerospace industry just of late, of the last couple of years. It's caused me some concern. So what I tell companies is, if what your current system is doing doesn't add value, doesn't drive out waste, doesn't add real savings, you should try doing something different. My old boss used to say, he was a very clever person. He used to say, if what you're doing adds value and the customers like, keep doing that. If your customers don't like it, do something different. Stop doing it. And I've always tried to adopt that principle. So if what we're currently doing in our quality systems, with our internal audits, with our management reviews, with customer satisfaction, with our supplier issues, if that's not working, we should try a little different program. So one of the things that I spend a lot of time talking to quality directors, quality managers, supplier people, is if all we're doing is rattling off numbers, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, that's a language we all understand. If you're in quality management systems, if you're an auditor, if you're in supplier management systems, we understand those numbers. We know what that means. But senior management doesn't talk in terms of those numbers. They may appreciate it, they may have read the standard, but the numbers they really understand, the numbers that they really appreciate, what they teach in business schools are money, dollars, P&L statements, return on investment. Those are the numbers that they live and breathe. That's how they're evaluated. That's how they're compensated. So if we're talking one language and they're talking a different language, we have to find a way either to translate for them or to get their attention. So translating for them is very difficult because it's taken me 30 years to even understand what those requirements mean, company after company. So what I try to do is help translate what I'm doing into terms that they understand. So for example, if you've read AS9100, if you've read ISO 9000, if you've read 1345 or GMP, it's kind of chock full of really meaty requirements, systems, business systems, processes, all sorts of stuff that really add value to an organization. And internal audits done the right way really add some value to an organization, can help take you from a good company to a great company. We all know that. I think many of us do. But maybe senior management doesn't know that. They only know, about meeting the numbers at the end of the month or at the end of the year. So when I do auditor training, and I've done that for many, many years, what I try to help them understand is that we need to speak a language that senior management not only understands, but to get their attention. And we have to be able to translate what we're doing into terms that they understand, into dollars saved. So let me see if I can give you a little story or an example of where I've tried to do this. Recently, about a year or so, I decided that for the audit that I was going to do, I would do it in terms of dollar savings. Because after a while, everybody can read the standard and say, oh, it doesn't meet 4.1 or 4.2. But I said, let me translate these into actually dollars. So I always like to start out on a factory floor because that's kind of where it's interesting. And I went out on the factory floor, and what I found, I went out with the quality manager, the management rep, um, is I looked up at the ceiling, and I noticed that they had boxes ready to ship, about 50 boxes stacked right to the ceiling. And so I turned to the management rep and I said to him, "What is the OSHA requirement for maximum stacking height for boxes?" I don't know if any of you know that, but he looked at me and he said, "I don't know." And I said, "That's the wrong answer." And then he looked back at me and laughed. He said, "Well, you don't know." I said, "Well, it's not my job to know. It's your job to know." So nowadays, with the swipe of your phone and Google, you can look it up. So we did. I said, "Well, let's look it up." And we looked up the OSHA requirement. I think it's 1910, if I remember. And boxes have to be stacked within, in some principle, in some states, it's 18 inches. In some states, it's 3 feet. Here in Connecticut, I think it's 18 inches. And his boxes were stacked right to the ceiling. So I said, obviously, it doesn't meet the OSHA requirement. And the reason it has to have that clearance is because of the sprinklers. It has to clear the sprinklers. And it is an OSHA fine. Now, we also looked up the fine. I don't know if any of you know the fine, but I'll save you the trouble. It's $1,000 a box. $1,000 a box if OSHA comes in and finds that. And OSHA is like writing tickets, right? They look up, they give you a fine. Here you have to pay it. So he had 50 boxes. So we calculated $50,000 savings. So I turned to him and I said, well, write that down. That's $50,000 we just saved the company. And then I said to him, and by the way, for lunch, let's go out to a nice place. And he says, anything you want, Joe, just keep going. So we walked a little bit further, and he had some eye wash stations. And I said to him, how often do the eye wash stations have to be checked and cleaned? And he looked at me and said, I don't know. I said, well, it's your job to know. And he laughed again. So we looked it up, and eye wash stations have to be checked and cleaned if appropriate once a month. That's an OSHA requirement, at least checked. The fine, if you don't do that, is $1,000 a station. And he had 20, 25 eye wash stations, which hadn't been checked in years. So I said, I just saved you another 25 grand. I said, write it down. And he said, thank you. Keep going, Joe, keep going. So we walk a little bit further, and we walk into the back area, and he had some bags of chemicals that were spilled on the factory floor. Apparently there was a little forklift incident. And I said, what happened here? He said, well, one of the guys came back from lunch. He maybe had a little bit too much of a cocktail at lunch, and he crashed into it. And they were waiting for somebody to clean it up. I said, well, if the EPA is in here, that's a $10,000 fine per bag because you have exposed toxic chemicals on a factory floor. And you have to report it, by the way. So he writes that down. Then we walked a little bit further, and I looked up at the ceiling. And over the ceiling were the panels by the air vents, and they were all black. And I said, when was the last time those things were cleaned and checked? He says, I don't know if they've ever been cleaned or checked. And I said, well, you've got them right over electronic boards. And of course, if any of you have and know anything about ESD, that's the worst thing you can do. The dust gets on the board. It causes all sorts of issues. And those boards were worth $25,000 a piece. So we had calculated that it might have saved him $100,000. So on it went. And, over the next 2 days, I bet you in cost avoidance, in cost savings, in fines, all sorts of things, we might have saved the company $300,000, $400,000, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. If you do audits in the right sort of way, you can find that in your factory tomorrow. So we wrote it all down, and he thanked me. He says, "Joe, thank you. This has been the best audit we've done." I said, "Well, let's go tell your boss. Let's go tell the owner of the company." And we walk into the conference room. The owner comes out, and I said, "Sir, I want to tell you about all the money we've saved you over the last couple of days." And he looked at me and he kind of grinned. He says, "Oh, I know how much money I'm paying you. Real gentleman." And I said, "Well, before you get too excited," I said, "my colleague here, your management rep, is going to read about all the cost savings." And he went through each point, and he had done the math, which was pretty easy to do. And he said, "We saved you over the last 2 days about $400,000 in savings." And what do you think the man said? I mean, there's only one answer to if I save you $400,000. He looked up at me and he said, "Thank you. Thank you for doing this." And then he said to me in the same breath, "Joe, when can you come back?" And I kind of laughed. I looked down at my calendar. I said, "I have a couple of days open." And, we laughed about it. And he said, "Thank you. This has been a really good audit." Because if I had gone in there and just talked about 4.1 and 4.2 and OSHA requirements, he'd have glazed over. It wouldn't have even got his attention. But what I was talking was a language he understood. He understood that money that we saved him over the last, that cost avoidance, that goes right to the bottom line. And of course, if you've spent any time in quality systems, in management systems, in manufacturing, you know this to be true. And oh, by the way, he said to me, he said to his colleague, "We need to do a lot more of this auditing. And Joe, you come in and train a whole bunch of our folks." So it was good for me as well. And I said, "I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to add value because I'm on your side. I'm trying to add some value." So when I look at that experience, and I've had that with a couple of companies, what we try to do is not that we're not going to do our traditional process-based audits and we're going to look for variability, but we need to also talk a language that gets the attention of senior management. And I think when we start talking in terms of money, in avoidance of fines, in regulatory requirements. I spend a lot of time in the last 10, 15 years in regulated industries, aerospace, medical device, pharmaceuticals, military. These are heavily regulated organizations. And the cost avoidance, the cost of poor quality in some of these places is astronomical. And getting the attention of senior management is critical. So I always try to go back to business. In fact, when I do audits now, the first thing I do when I meet senior management, rather than ask them about the quality policy, which is important, I ask them about business. I say, "How's business going? How are your customers? Have you added any? Have you lost some?" So it gets them in a way of understanding the language that we need to talk. And now when I train auditors, I tell them, don't forget, it's not just say what you do and do what you say. It's make sure it works, make sure it's effective. That's always been in the standard, which we've managed to overlook. You have to look at metrics. You have to look at things like customer satisfaction metrics. You've got to look at scrap and rework and repair. And my oldest daughter is a tax accountant, and she spends her entire life working with big corporations. She gets paid a fair amount of money to help them save tax dollars, and she gets a lot of attention. But when I talk to her about this stuff, it glazes over. She doesn't appreciate it because it's not the language she talks in. So when I go into the same company sometimes that she does, it's a different DeCarlo, I say, "Well, look, our audits, our systems save money." And they always ask me, "Well, how? How do they do that?" And I talk to them about the cost of regulatory compliance, the cost of doing things wrong. And I'll ask them, what does one customer complaint cost you? Not how did you deal with it, because that they have to do. What does one reworked product cost you? What does one return from the field? What does one variance, if you're in the medical industry with a 483, what does that cost you? And their eyes light up. Now all of a sudden it registers because we're talking in a language that they understand. And it's particularly, the timing is particularly good because if you look at some of the issues that are happening in the aerospace industry right now, a lot of it is in the supply base. I have a good friend that is a aircraft repair person. I won't tell you where because I don't want you looking him up, but he's right here in the Northeast and he repairs aircraft. That's what he does for a living. He's been doing it for 30, 40 years. And I saw him in a Knights of Columbus meeting the other day. And I said to him, Tony, what's up with all this Boeing stuff? What's up? And I'm in quality, by the way. And he looked at me and he kind of put his head down and he got very quiet. He started to whisper. And, we're in a crowded room. And I said, Tony, what's happening? He says, we know exactly what's happening. I said, you do? I said, well, tell me. I'm trying to understand this. He kind of looked his head and he got very quiet. And everybody was wondering what we were talking about. He said, well, we're hiring people that aren't trained. We're putting them on lines and we're giving them jobs. We're not giving them the right kind of preparation. We're not preparing them for success. And we believe, he said, that this is causing real issues in the supply chain. And if you look and you study some of the issues that are happening, a lot of that is being contributed by people that maybe haven't been given the right training, the right experience, the right orientation. I see it in every company that I go in. I see people doing jobs that they're not competent in to do. Now, when I say competence, I mean this with the utmost respect. Competence in the standard is measured in the terms of experience, education, background, training, guidance. Competence is not just taking a course or reading a procedure. Competence are all those things. And I go into some companies and I'll ask the question, how are people competent to do this job? And they say, oh, we train them. And I say, how do you train them? And they say, well, we give them a procedure and we say, read and sign that you've understood this. And I say, well, that's not training, is it? Because it assumes that the person will read it. It assumes that the people will understand it. And it also assumes that the person will comprehend it. And I said, and that's not happening. I can tell you that's not happening because I spend time with these folks. So we have to give our employees, we have to give people at every level, whether it's in the aerospace industry, automotive, medical device, we have to give them the right kind of preparation so that they do the jobs properly and that they do the jobs. Even the best employee, even the best worker is going to get it wrong once in a while. So if we don't give the people the right kind of experience, the right kind of training, the right kind of background, they're going to make mistakes. And I believe, and I lose a lot of sleep over this, that's what's happening now. We're bringing people, we're throwing them at the jobs and we're saying, sort it out. And so when I go and do audits, I'll ask those tough questions and I get a lot of strange looks. Like, what do you mean our people aren't competent? Well, what kind of background did they have? What kind of education did they have? What kind of skills do they bring? And what have you done as an organization to make sure that they're successful? And sometimes I get, well, they're not going to stick around very long. I said, well, that doesn't help me when I'm on an aircraft, hoping that the plane gets from point A to point B. So when we talk about audits, when we talk about quality management systems, we need to make sure that this is integrated with business systems. It's not one in place of the other. It's not one or the other. And I've heard that many times. Well, you can't make business and have quality system. That's nonsense. World-class companies do it all. They're constantly trying to improve their systems, their process, their people. They have world-class processes, world-class systems, and they set the right tone. And I can give you so many examples, and I won't not to bore you, but I know that some of you work in those organizations where they do a lot of things right and you make a lot of money. That's the whole point. If you satisfy your customers and you invest in your people and your processes and your systems and your infrastructure and your systems, your overall processes, you will satisfy the customers and make money. If you don't, and I see a lot of companies that struggle with this, and if you don't measure the right things, eventually, as my old boss used to say, it catches up with you. And I think that's what we're starting to see. Now, let's hope it's just a blip, and let's hope it's not something that's systematic. But I have seen more of it just since COVID, last few years, than I have in probably the 20 years before. So we need to make sure that regulatory systems are robust, that quality systems are as good as we have. You should be constantly reviewing them. I was with a company today where I was helping them. I was doing audits for them, and their procedures were okay. I mean, technically they met the requirements of AS9100 or ISO 9000, but I said, they haven't been looked at in a few years. It's time to do a full review of all your documents to make sure they're current. And the owner's eyes got, oh, how much is that going to cost? And I said, how much is it going to cost you not to do it? And your processes. And I said, you have a lot of people where there are multiple languages spoken out there. How about using some pictures? How about using videos? How about using a medium that people understand? How about making sure that those systems are really helping drive improvement? And we got to a point where we were in violent agreement. So what I have been working with companies to do is to help revise their audit process so that they're not just say what you do and do what you say, that they're really looking at metrics, that they're looking at processes, that they're looking at the cost of what it costs to do things wrong, which means you have to look at your findings, your returns, your customer complaints, customer satisfaction in terms of the dollars that we're wasting in our business. Because every time you save a dollar that's wasted, that dollar goes right to the bottom line. So you don't have to get another customer. You don't have to ship another product. Every dollar you save internally drops right to the bottom line. Just ask an accountant, and I have my daughter. That money is less money that we're wasting. So your internal audit system should be one of the most critical systems that you have, because it's about what are we doing wrong? How can we make ourselves more valuable? How can we make ourselves more, save more? And so that's what I've been working with a lot of auditors to say, yes, I mean, it's easy to go out and just, say what you do what you say. Is there a procedure? But adding real value to your audit system is something that that should be everybody's point. And the other thing is, when's the last time you integrated some of those metrics in your management review process and tie that into dollar savings? And I look at a lot of management review meetings over the course of the year, and maybe a handful of them really get the attention of senior management. So can we incorporate some of the dollars saved over the course of the year in our management reviews? And one of the things I've been encouraging, which is what we used to do years ago, is not a gap assessment, not a ISO 9000 or AS9100 assessment, but a real business assessment. How well are we doing in relationship to how well the company is performing? And you'd be surprised when you start to really tie it to business, to take ISO or AS or ISO 1345 and tie it to business, how it starts to get the attention of senior management, of the people that are actually owning and running the business.
Yeah.
Oh, somebody's in
Right.
there. If we can just
Well, have a great afternoon or great.
Greg, okay. So we also want to tie that to investing in our people and training our people properly and giving them the tools to be successful. And I'm a big believer, if you measure the cost of turnover, the cost of replacing people, and you add that to the cost of a business, it's huge. I was in one company recently where their turnover rate was 60%. Because I asked them that metric, 60%, which means they have a new company every 2 years. And
Wow.
that number, yeah, I couldn't believe it because a good turnover is 10% or less. And this was 60. And this was a pretty big company. And what they said was that when we had everybody go work from home, well, when you're home, they were looking for other jobs as well. And it was too easy to do that. And so I said to them, well, bring everybody back. And they said, well, they don't want to come back. And we did an assessment, and I found that their turnover rate was directly tied to communication of senior management and management to their people. They just weren't reaching out and talking to their folks. So their people started to feel disconnected from the very company that they worked for. So what I did was I took that turnover rate and I translated into real dollars, and it was, oh, I don't know, $700,000. And I said, that's what you're wasting in just replacing people each year. And they couldn't believe it. They said, no, that can't be. And if you sit down with HR people and you calculate the cost of turnover, the cost of replacing people, it's a huge number. So keeping your people, investing in them, training them. Oh, by the way, that's part of AS9100. That's part of ISO 9000. That's part of every quality system is competence and training. And so we spend time. So these aren't things that are just, hey, Joe had a great idea one day. These are things we have to do in our business to stay compliant. These are things we have to do to run successful businesses. And, maybe we've forgotten a bit of that. And so my final point to them is that quality assurance, quality deployment doesn't cost us money. It saves us money. Whenever I go out to work with a company, of course I get paid, right? I get a fee or I get a salary, whatever it is, and many of you do. But I'm always thinking, is what I'm doing adding some value? Are they translating this into business results? Because if I can, then I know that they'll have me back and that they see value in it, which is what my point is. If I say, that was a waste of time, that was just checking the boxes, I still get paid, but it's a missed opportunity. So I always look at quality systems, whether they be ISO 9001, whether they be AS9100, whether they be 1345 or OSHA requirements or EPA requirements, as an opportunity to add value, to save dollars, to add real value to our organization, dollars. And when I talk to management, when I talk to operational people, that's how I translate for them. And lately, now this isn't the back end of my career, I get their attention because I'm talking a language that they understand. And I think I would challenge all of you, if you are an internal auditor, an external auditor, or if you're a supplier management person, to sit down tomorrow morning and calculate the cost of doing things wrong. What does it cost you to do things wrong and over again, the organization? And are there ways that we can change our quality system, change our management systems, improve our audits to really add value? And if you start to do that, management pays attention. Senior management pays attention because that's the language they've been trained in. That's the language they understand. So that's kind of the overall theme of the organization of the presentation. But I just want to go back and see if you have any specific questions about things that you've done or stories you want to share, or questions that you have about AS or ISO. Oh, by the way, I would be negligent if I didn't say that I did hear through a couple of the registrars that they are revising slightly the ISO 9001, the AS9100 standard to include a couple of lines, which have caused some head scratching. They met recently, and they initially said that the standards weren't going to be revised to 2030, which is unusual because they're usually revised every 5 to 7 years. And they've come out recently and they said, oh, by the way, We have added a couple of lines that you have to assess the impact of your business to climate change and the impact on your customers and suppliers. And a lot of us in the auditing field said, what did they say? And so, because that's such a broad topic, and I guess it makes sense because we're all impacted by, the climate. And, remember, ISO standards are written for every country in the world and every industry in the world. So a lot of us are saying, well, how do we do that? You know, and so that's going to cause a little bit of concern, I think, out in industry when auditors start to go out and bring up a topic which is pretty controversial about climate change, and have you assess the impact in your own business. And oh, by the way, what's the cost of that? What's the cost of your suppliers? So that's the major change, and there will be other changes as the standards are revised. The other change in the medical industry, which has gotten some attention, is that for the first time, in so many years, they have decided to harmonize or replace the GMP medical device requirements with ISO 1345, which sounds like no big deal, but it is a very big deal. And we'll see how that all plays out as companies need to um, harmonize those two requirements. So we'll get a lot of questions about, what are the differences between the GMP, which are U.S. government requirements, and also the ISO 135, which is an international spec. So there's a lot of changes,
Joe,
a lot of good changes. Yeah.
couple of comments in the chat. So one
Yeah.
was from Narendra that says, Joe DeCarlo made a good point, and that I have the similar experience dealing with the senior management. Talk the language they understand. I
Right.
worked with the head of the finance and showed the amount of money lost in scrap and rework
Right.
for not doing it the right way. By doing
Right.
this, I was able to get the resources I needed to prevent the problem
Wonderful.
from occurring. And then the other comment was from Jay Mendoka that says, in Boeing case has the different layers caused the dilution in quality, too many handoffs. And then Alaska, and you can handle them all.
Yeah.
This third
Yeah.
question is, that is due to the new EU regulations, the climate change new lines. That's from Yvonne. All right, so I will mute myself and you can address that. Sorry.
Well, thank you for those comments. The first comment from Naren is, thank goodness. Amen to that. And I think it emphasizes my point. If you start talking a language that they understand, you will get the resources. Because I never go in. You go into your boss and say, hey, I need $100,000. They'll likely say, well, please get out of my office. If you go in and say, hey, we're going to save $200,000, you're going to get the resource. And that's my point. And it's not that we're doing a lot differently. We're just talking a different language and we're doing assessment. And I've seen that so many times where we need to help explain to management the real value in our business and what we do in quality systems, in supplier management, in supplier development. We need to add value, which means that management needs to understand what we're doing. So thank you, Naren, for emphasizing that. That's very important. I think Boeing is a very complicated story. And I think there is a good Netflix show that you can watch about the case of Boeing. I'm not here to bash Boeing. I'm a customer. I rely on them. I'm rooting for them to get it right. Now, sometimes companies have to have these kind of things to flush out and find their problems. So this may be a good thing for us. I noticed that the CEO was asked to resign, or he quit, or whatever it was. And I think this may be a heads up to their change. I think a lot of the problems that Boeing has had are the way they've done business now in the last 20 years. They've outsourced a good deal more. They've focused perhaps a little bit too much on volume and not enough on quality. But I think that's a very complicated scenario, which will need to improve. The other thing I'll say is that Boeing and the U.S. Aerospace industry is critical, and I'm working here in the U.S., is critical to our success. If we don't sort this out, we're in real trouble, folks. The Boeing case, Boeing is probably, if I had to name 5 of the most important companies in the United States, Boeing would be at the top of that list. because aircraft, if you look at the amount of jobs, how many other industries have we lost over the last 30 or 40 years? Aerospace cannot be one of them. So we need to sort this out. We need to drive improvement. They need to sort that situation out. That's critical. Otherwise, we're in real trouble, folks. So
Joe,
what's it? Yeah.
when I go to India this summer, if I go, I think I'm going. I'm trying to make sure I'm on an Airbus plane.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Sorry.
Are you
Sorry,
trying to
Bob.
help my point or not? Yes. I mean,
that's the cost of quality.
that's right. That's exactly right. That's the cost of quality. And Boeing has got to sort this out. So we'll see what happens there. The last point that Yvonne made about climate change, I think we give the Europeans a little bit too much credit for too many things. I've been working with the European organizations. I worked with the German organization for many years, TUV. I worked with the British. Yes, it's important, and I think, I think if you look at what's happening around the world, ISO 9000 and international standards are just that. I think they're trying to drive some real change, and why not start in a standard that 10 million companies have adopted? And so it's always a first kind of toe in the water as to what's likely to come down the path. Just like when ISO 9000 put the words risk in there, who was talking about risk management? Very, very few professionals that I was talking about. So it's always a first step, and I think that's probably what they're trying to do. And we all live here on the same planet, and what we do here is just as important as what they do halfway around the world. And we're all in it together, as my old boss used to say. It says, in your long career, what has been the biggest what? I don't believe what I am seeing. Oh, the biggest. Wow. That's a great question. Two things come to mind. I spent 5 years in the American automotive industry in Ford, GM, and Chrysler back in the late 90s. And people forget that in 1955, General Motors had 60% market share. And when I saw them in 2008, almost filed for bankruptcy, I never thought in my life I would see GM go from, 60% market share, the big three, to bankruptcy. And if it wasn't for the bailout, they would have been bankrupt, GM and Chrysler. So that was a big, I can't believe that. And the second thing that's been equal is when I saw that plane where the door was flown off, and then they come out and said that somebody forgot to put the bolts on or whatever nonsense that was. I wasn't there, but I thought to myself, that can't happen. It cannot happen. You cannot have doors flying off planes, and not in this country anyway. And so I looked at that, and I have seen some crazy things in plants, but usually it's because companies don't know what they don't know. But those two things in my lifetime and in my working career of 34, 40 years, I just thought I would never see. And hopefully it's the start of a fix. And I could tell you kind of hundreds of different scenarios. I think many of it is, my old boss used to say, I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, but I don't know what I don't know. So a lot of times when I go into companies, I just assume they don't know what they don't know. And part of my job is to help them to understand, to explain, to help them, maybe go in a different direction. That's how I can add some value. And I can't blame people if they don't even know that what the requirements are. So sometimes I'll point them and say, have you looked at this? Have you read this? Have you tried this? And that approach, at least in the last 20 years or so, has been successful. All right, so any other questions about quality systems, about changes, about ISO 9000, about anything else?
Joe,
yeah.
It's funny you mentioned risk management, because I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah.
If you had any thoughts about how this can be applied, or if you had any experience with it applying to to risk management in the supply chain, because in
Yeah.
things like global trade compliance,
Yeah.
I've seen this done for years where they add dollar value to
Yeah.
the risk, but the problem we run into is sometimes those dollar values are so high
Yeah.
that they almost make it abstract. They make it
It's true.
unbelievable, because we're
It's
talking
true.
about, multiple times the value of your exports, or loss
Right.
of export privileges, which is catastrophic. So
Right.
the numbers get so high
It's
that
true.
management ends up ignoring them anyway, because it just,
Yeah. I think that's a great point. It's a great point, because who would have ever been able to calculate the risk in a global pandemic, right? And the cost. I mean, that is like, first of all, I never saw an RPN number for that. I never saw anybody put that in their risk management plan. And trying to calculate the cost, it's off the charts. In fact, I challenge you to try to figure out what the cost of this Boeing problem is. I mean, it's going to cost them. If you follow the stock market, it's already cost them how much in market share. And sometimes the numbers are too big. So I believe in reasonable small chunks. And I try to look at an organization and say, what is one return cost us? What does one customer complaint cost us? What does this bad supplier and the material cost us? And put it in terms that people understand. And then you can multiply it out. So that's one of the things that risk management does for us. It helps to not only dollarize, but put in some sort of a realistic figure and a realistic approach to mitigating risk. I used to do a lot of this within our IT systems. And if you look at what the risks are in our IT systems, they could be catastrophic. So what we try to do is help people understand that when you do an internal audit, when I was talking to you about that one, the risk of not doing things right, of just packing up boxes in the wrong spot, can be hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that people can understand, they get their mind around. And I think the more you do it, the more you realize that, Phil Crosby may have been right when he wrote The Quality is Free. And he said that most companies are wasting 20% of what they do just doing things wrong and over again. So, yeah, I think this is a good way of helping management understand risk management and the risk that's inherent in their business across every industry. And it's also a way that ironically, risk management is now starting to be integrated and taught in most of the business schools, in most of the curriculum, whereas it hadn't been, when I went to school back in the day. So hopefully we're starting, and it started with ISO 9000 in 2015 when they started to put the language in there, and you'll see more of it going forward in every industry. So maybe that's what they're trying to do with respect to climate change. So thank you for that comment. Any other questions or concerns or stories you want to share? Huh, quiet. I do have that effect on people.
You covered it so good. It's like people are like, this is great stuff.
Well, I'm very passionate about it. I not only talk about it, but I try to practice it. I believe in it. I believe in it. But it's taken me, like I said, I'm celebrating my 40th year in compliance this year, and it's taken me 40 years to figure out this thing. So I want to share that. It says, thank you, Joe. This was very informative. Change date. So there will be a formal revision in 2030. I didn't see the date. The new revision with climate change is due out this year. You'll see that. You'll see that language. But the real formal change will be in 2030. I'm still hoping that I work by then. That will be how many years? 6 years from now. So we'll see whether or not I'm still working on the next revision of ISO and AS, but we'll see if that's still the case. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their time and attention and listening and asking great questions and participating. You do good work. You do important work. Don't ever forget that when you're in compliance, whether it's quality, whether it's supply chain, whether it's management, this is really important work that we do. and we're on the front lines of helping companies stay competitive. I have a vested interest in your success. I'm rooting for everybody here because the alternative is, as one politician I heard say, the rest of the world is trying to eat our lunch. And I thought that was the best line. We want to stay one step ahead of the rest of the world, which means we have to do it better, faster, more effective. Improvement, continuous improvement is not an option, it's survival. So I'm rooting for everybody. And if I can help you in any way, if I can answer a question, if I can provide you some information, please ask, because you're not bothering me. It's what I do. And there's my AOL account, which I'm very proud of. I'm an original AOL member. My wife says, you know, you should change that. It makes you look old and dated. I say, that's the look I'm going for, you know, old and dated. So
Go for it.
I'm actually pretty proud of that. So you can either write me or email me if you have a thought or you just want to say hello. I'm happy to participate. So again, thank you for a good evening. It's a great way to.
Thank you.
Thank
It was
you.
a very good presentation.
Thank you, Larry. Thank
It
you
was
so much.
excellent. Absolutely.
Very.
We did post the let's see, I posted the link to the CEU certificate,
Yeah.
the link to the survey so we can get people's thoughts. Also a link to the PowerPoint, and that will be by the end of the week. PowerPoint and recording, hopefully by the end of the week. And we
Right.
also are
Great.
going to send you a gift certificate. It's coming from the Massachusetts chapter, and
Oh.
it says thank you. It's going to be from Sandeep, and it says Amazon. It's real. It's not spam. It's Sandeep is
Oh,
a
right.
real. He's our gift person from the Apex ASC Massachusetts chapter. So he'll send that to you, Joe.
Oh, thank you. I
Great
appreciate
work,
that.
my friend. Excellent,
Yeah.
excellent. So I'm going to stay on for networking. I don't know if you want to, but I'll stop the recording so all those shy people can ask questions. Hang on. There we go.